All right, everybody, welcome back. We're looking at receivers still, and we are cracking the seal on the third rounders now, the guys who are currently projected by the aggregate to go in the third. Now, they may not go in the third. In fact, the aggregate may not even reflect this in about 2 minutes because the aggregate always changes because it's an aggregate, but it's a decent northern star to set your course by. So, third rounders, let's go. Jalen Polk. I know this guy. I'm pretty familiar with this guy. I watched him play basically every snap he's played over the last few years. Jalen Polk, Washington Husky, 22 years old. Had a lot of success the last couple years, especially 2023, where he took advantage of a big opportunity lended to him by the McMillan injury. More on McMillan later, by the way. 6'1", 203 pounds, so NFL size, bigger than I expected. 31 and 3/4 arms, 9 and 3/4 hands. The testing was okay. The 40 was slow. The acceleration and the vert were good, and the broad was great. So he's a good athlete. He's just not really fast in a straight line, and that's to his disadvantage. Excuse me. It's worth noting that 4 of the 6 major big boards have him in the second, and 2 of them have him in the third. The aggregate has him in the third barely, but he's a guy who could bump into the second pretty easily. In fact, the aggregate had him in the second for most of this offseason. And last year, he was a monster. 70 catches, 1,160 yards, 9 touchdowns, 4 drops. Pretty good PFF grade. The year before that, he was the third receiver behind Odunze and McMillan, but still had 700 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he's been producing for a really prolific passing attack for a couple years now. So easy to like a lot of things about him. He's a great use of... He's a hands catcher. Uses his hands really well. He's got a big catch radius. He's somebody who doesn't use his body to catch the ball. He's really good at tracking the ball deep down the field over his shoulder. One of those guys who just kind of instinctively understands how to track the ball. He can catch through contact. He can bring in catches through contact from defenders. He's an explosive athlete, which makes you wonder how you might be able to utilize him even beyond just the basic structure in the NFL. And he's an excellent run blocker. He's really good at engaging defensive backs at the second and third level and getting them out of the way for the running back. So his speed is forgettable. We don't love his top speed. He's not going to burn anybody in the NFL probably. There is a little bit of laziness, I feel like, in his route running. There is a little bit of like rounding things off. There is a little bit of not having a clean break. There is a little bit of extra steps. He's not great running after the catch. He's somebody who tends to kind of get what's there when he catches it and not too much else. Doesn't have an extra gear to separate in the route, so none of that really. And he's another guy who will struggle when pressed. And a lot of these receivers are like that. He's not alone in that regard. But when you press him, you're probably going to make life hard for him. He's going to have a hard time beating it. So I like the ball skills. And ball skills, I'm starting to think, are the most important thing for a receiver. If you have ball skills, you can overcome almost everything else and become something. And if you have ball skills on top of other things, you're going to be great. And then you have the athleticism. So Polk's very desirable. If he can figure out route running a little bit, which is a reasonable expectation, he's only 22 when the season starts, I would take him in day 2, no problem, and I would say late second rounder. I like him in the second round. I've really come around on this guy. It took me a while to warm up to him because I looked at him and went, he's not Jalen McMillan. But as the year went on, eventually I was like, you know what? I think he's actually better than Jalen McMillan. Not in every way, but in enough ways to make him actually, I think, a more covetable player at this point. All right, so Jermaine Burton's our next guy here, the Alabama receiver. Alabama did not send their best and their brightest from the receiver position this year, but Jermaine Burton's a guy who probably would have been up there if not for some stuff. There's some stuff. We'll talk about that stuff now. So 23 when the season starts, decent size, 6 feet flat, 196 pounds, 31 arms, 9 and 7/8 hands. Testing was good. Good 40, good acceleration, really good vert, phenomenal broad. So he's got a lot of explosiveness, a lot of ability to, a lot of burst, 95 percentile broad. A couple big boards actually have him in the second, a couple have him in the third, one has him in the fourth. The aggregate has him in the third, middle third-ish. I imagine he goes there. Did not explode last year with the production. 800 yards on 40 catches. Okay. 8 touchdowns. Didn't drop anything. That's great, right? 39 catches, 0 drops. That's definitely worth something, but didn't explode. There were a lot of things going on with Alabama last year that were suboptimal for him, of course. Year before that, he was okay. Not too different from 2023, really. So we didn't take that next step, mostly. One thing about Jermaine Burton that separates him from a lot of this draft class at the position is that he stands up really well against press coverage. He can beat press. He knows how to play against it, knows how to beat it. So if you want somebody to play on the outside and beat press coverage, he's probably your guy. He's really good at tracking deep balls. I know he doesn't have tremendous deep speed, but it's pretty good. And he can track the ball in the air, get himself underneath it, and make a play on it. His hands are great. Barely drops anything. Shifts between multiple speeds really effortlessly, which is great for route running. Has a great understanding of how to shift his speed constantly. He's got great body control as well. When he's in the air, he's got great control of his movements. And he's a very explosive overall athlete. So Jermaine Burton holding him back. He is a little bit awkward and slow going through his route. There's a little bit of wasted movement. Again, it's one of those things where you have to look at things through multiple angles. I like his speed shifts. I like the fact that he can shift gears. But there are some things running his routes that just don't look right. He's not a yak threat. He doesn't make yards after the catch. He doesn't make big plays after the catch typically. Doesn't really give effort as a blocker either, which he's a little bit on the smaller side, so it's not that big of a deal, but you'd certainly prefer him to be able to block. Didn't produce all that much in college, which there are good reasons why, but it still didn't happen. And there are some character concerns. I think there was a game in 2022 where he punched a fan. It was like the LeGarrette Blunt thing. I don't think it was that bad, but it was bad. And there is a little bit of a character red flag with Burton. So you're at, caveat emptor. Nevertheless, he brings some really interesting things to the table here. I love the fact that he can beat press. He stands up to press coverage well. So circumstances probably hurt him in college. There are some missing pieces, but I think that what is there is really interesting. So I look at Jermaine Burton and I say late second round. I think there's potential here beyond what we saw in college. And you are taking a risk with the character concerns, but he was clean last year. He didn't do anything dumb to my knowledge in 2023. So I'm going to shrug my shoulders on that and say, he was young and dumb then, and he's not so young and not so dumb now. And hopefully that's true. So Jermaine Burton, I would go late second round. I like him a little bit more than the aggregate does right now. All right, one more guy, and it's another Washington Husky. You guys know him pretty well probably if you watch my streams. If you watch the Huskies games, you know what's up with Jalen McMillan. And I got to be honest, I thought McMillan was our best receiver after 2022. I thought he was a little better than Odunze and, of course, Polk, who at that time was the third receiver. And throughout a lot of this year, I kept thinking to myself, when McMillan gets back, this offense is going to be unstoppable. And to a certain extent, that was true because McMillan's clearly better than a guy like Bernard. He's clearly better than the guys who were replacing him. But I don't know, a second look at McMillan's skill set. Obviously, he's still great at the college level. He missed a lot of time last year and still had 550 yards. But I don't know. I go back and look at it, and I'm like, I don't think my initial assumption was correct here. So at one point, I thought McMillan was going to be the guy who would be a really high pick from this offense, more so than even Penix or Odunze. But that's clearly not going to happen now. However, still probably going to be a top 100 pick. Good measurements, good measurables. He's got some decent size to him, for sure. Combine was pretty decent. Decent speed, decent acceleration, good vert, really good broad. 3-cone was okay. The 20-yard shuttle was okay. So more good than bad on his combine. Big boards mostly have him in the third. Database has him in the third. That seems to be the way it's leaning. Had 1,100 yards on 80 catches in 2022. Great year. 2023 dropped off because of the injury. But really, the thing that stands out here is the drops. He's got a pretty high drop rate. It's close to 10%. For every 10 catches he makes, he has one drop, which some of that was because in 2023, he came back, and I want to say that first game after McMillan came back was rough. But he had 7 drops in 2022, so his hands are not that good. But there are some things about him that are good. He builds separation in his routes, even though he doesn't have great speed. He's good at finding little ways to build separation. He's got big hands, so his hands can improve, and they should be able to envelope the ball in a way that we haven't seen from him yet. He's a good run blocker. He has a lot of little tricks that he can use to shake coverage, a lot of little things that he can do to mislead defenses, and he maintains his separation throughout the route. Some guys get separation and then give it up at the point of catch. This guy finds ways to keep his separation so he can make a play on the ball by himself. Acceleration feels slow on the football field. It feels like it takes him a while to get up to top speed. Washington's scheme made his life easy, and he doesn't have some of the stuff that a guy like Odunze or even Polk have to lean on to make up for the lack of that. Lots of drops despite his big hands, like I said. 2023 was injury-riddled and in some ways maybe exposed him a little bit because the offense didn't miss him that much. Doesn't really have deep ball skills, doesn't really have the ability to track the ball in the air, and physical corners are going to take him out of his game. He can't keep up with physicality the way you like. So, I had a tough time with this one because, again, I look back at 2022 and I thought he was our best receiver. That seems silly now, but at that time I thought McMillan was going to be the guy who would be a first-round pick. I didn't think Odunze would. And then Odunze had the crazy 2023 and changed everything. So I still think there's a small chance that he reclaims his glory from 2022, but realistically, there are holes in his game that I was just not picking up on in 2022. So I would take him in the third round. He's a risk. I don't love it, but I'll take the risk on him in the third round and feel pretty okay about it. All right, so that is it for the guys in this batch. We're going to do another third-round batch a little bit later, and then we're going to be moving on to Day 3 guys tomorrow after the Hawks Nest show tonight. So tune in for that. Tune in for future videos. Check out the old videos if you haven't yet. See you guys later. Go Hawks.